everyone. You've seen the stats, and now we hope to make the case for why accelerating action will lead to place supporting small and growing businesses front and center of national policy. Successfully supporting these SGBs requires cultivating entrepreneurial ecosystem, and ANDE is dedicated to doing just that by building a thriving network of people and organizations and supporting them through policy and program initiatives. We cannot do this without the active support of our partners across the region and are very grateful to them. Partners whose logos you will see throughout these 3 days, and many, many more who continue to support us every day in our work. Once again, a very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for making the time to be here. We look forward to your active participation and feedback over the next 3 days.
All right. Hello again, everyone. We will, without much ado, jump into our session today with these very, very erudite speakers here. It's going to be a conversation, so we look forward to receiving your questions. A little bit of setting of the context before I hand this over to Gigi, our fabulous facilitator for today. Why have we picked textiles, right? When we talk about circularity, the session earlier today talked about what this means at the city level, right? What are cities doing? But specifically, why textiles, right? We've picked this because this slide is courtesy of the opening presentation of the South Asia Convening from SAFAL Partners, right? Where we were looking at the major industries that are driving growth in the countries of the region. And you will see in green there that textiles is a significantly big theme across 4 countries in the region, right? Nepal and Bhutan are a couple of the others that you don't really necessarily see textiles playing a big role. So that's why textiles, right? Textiles also happen to be the second largest export segment from South Asia to the world. So we felt like this would be an appropriate topic to dive a little deep and look at what exactly circularity means for the textile sector, and what the wonderful folks and their organizations that you see in the session today are doing on that front. So like I said, do keep in mind, it will be a slightly deep dive because we want you to get a good sense of the great work that they're doing. Please do keep the questions coming in the Q&A box because we will attempt to answer them during the conversation, and those that we don't get to, we will get to at the end of the session. So with that, Gigi, take it away.
Thank you, Sucharita. Thank you for having us over, and thank you everyone who's on the panel. While I was planning this session, we have a mantra in Enviu ourselves, which says, together is more. And I think the dot that connects all of us on that panel is that we are in partnership with each other. And that's what makes together is more for us very, very special. And also for today, while we're all together here. I thought it would be really nice, the topic of this session, building a circular economy in textiles. What does it take? So I think if we all have to shout out, one word, I'm sure all of us in most cases will say partnership, right? So in conversation also, what I would like to do is to have all of us talk around a coffee table with coffee in our hands, which also means that the audience is included too. So put in your questions there. We will handle your questions. And of course, I like that we are an all-woman panel team too. Will that mean that we finish on time? Yes. So anyway, I'd like to start with, at Enviu, we found that partnerships are the secret sauce to our success. So what we do in Enviu, we ideate, build, and replicate ventures and solutions to, of course, drive a sustainable and an inclusive economy. So how do we propel these solutions to drive the fundamental vision, the fundamental change we envision? So this is where our partners come into play, making our work bigger and better. I mean, we need partners, we need stakeholders who bring specialized expertise and USPs to the table. And we also believe that the most impactful and scalable change is achievable only through partnerships. It is a collaborative journey that we've seen time and again that will drive us towards significant and sustainable transformation. I'd like to direct my first question to Fernanda. Before that, the part I missed is introduction. So I would like all of us to introduce ourselves and then Fernanda take this question.
Nice. Then I can start introducing myself. I didn't hear the question yet, but I'll be glad to answer when it comes. I'm Fernanda Drummond, Strategy Lead for Inclusive Societies at the H&M Foundation. We are a family philanthropy working to enable the textile industry to become socially inclusive and planet positive. Thank you. I'm very glad to be here today.
Thank you, Fernanda. Sophie, will you go next?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Gigi. So I'm Sophie from Fashion for Good. I'm an innovation manager in our validation team. So Fashion for Good is a global initiative that is set up to connect innovators and the industry to drive commercial adoption of sustainable solutions at each stage of the supply chain. So we really focus on innovation, scouting, validating, scaling innovation, and bringing the entire industry together actually in a pre-competitive space. That's really the DNA of what we do.
Very nice. Thank you, Sophie. Iska? You're on mute.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. So, my name is Jiska. I work within Enviu, just like Gigi. Within Enviu, I am the program managers on our textiles domain. Our ambition with the textiles domain is to establish a circular apparel value chain. And of course, our ambition can only be achieved through partnerships, like Gigi says. We definitely believe that the problem is big enough for multiple players to contribute there. What we do within Enviu is currently in Kenya, Bangladesh, and India mainly. Like Gigi says, we are analyzing the ecosystem, trying to find the gaps towards circularity, and we build ventures there. We first test it, we fail, of course. Some of them succeed, and those are the ones that we keep building. With eventually the goal that the ventures are financially sustainable and don't need further philanthropic funding. On a daily basis for me, it means that I'm in between working with the funders, with the local implementation teams, with our execution partners, which is a big challenge, but a lovely job.
Thank you, Iska. With that bridge, I mean, I'll take that as a bridge to talk about, just say a line about me, because you very well explain what Enviu does, but I take care of partnerships in Asia. And like I said, we know that at least in Enviu, it is the key element for our success and has been that way for a long time right now. So I like the way I jumped into the conversation like we are all old friends. We are, right, in the industry. So Fernanda, again, the spotlight on you. Why is partnership and collaboration valuable to the H&M Foundation? Just would love to hear from you about that.
I love how you're starting the conversation. We already started, but, setting the scene here for this conversation, because I think that collaborations and partnerships are important not only for the H&M Foundation, but really for the whole industry, for all industries, if you think about it. Because what we are going through right now, what everyone here in this room and in this event is doing is being part, supporting, enabling, catalyzing this major transformation that is needed in the textile industry and many industries as well, but we are here in the textile industry. And it's this whole transformation moving from the take, make, use waste linear model, right, into the circular model. And this is not an easy, simple, incremental solution task. It's a major transformation, as I said, in the modus operandi of how things work, in what actors are involved, in, what are the KPIs that are going to be needed for the future, the common goals, the individual goals. It's so much transformation. And the partnerships and collaborations are important because no one can do this transformation alone. We need brands in one side doing their parts. We need to change from transactional relationships to transformative relationships. It's really a whole systems change. It's a whole new way of doing business, right? A circular economy is a completely different way of doing business, of running the economy. So that's why we need to bring everyone along with us to enable this transformation. As I told you, as a family philanthropy, we work for the whole textile industry, right? And we do that. We enable these partners who are like-minded, but also non-like-minded to get together. So NGOs coming together with businesses. So we make sure that we don't the collaborators, entrepreneurs, but also NGOs, nonprofit, academia, and even governments. We make sure that everyone is working together, building on top of each other's activities towards systems change. There's a lot of fear sometimes in the nonprofit sector to get involved with the private sector. And we are here to, just like you at Enviu, our great partners, and at Fashion for Good, we're here to demystify this relationship, to actually bring everybody together with the private sector and enable systems change.
Thank you, Fernanda. I like how you strongly use the word transformation. I really like that. And another thing really gave me goosebumps, because when we talk about partnerships, we're always talking about like-minded and like-driven partners. But I like how you said, we also bring in like-minded and not so like-minded. I'm going to probably circle back, to another question on that. But Sophie, I'd like to, since we are talking about partnerships being at the very core of our organizations. So how do you choose to work with a particular partner? How do you make it happen within Fashion for Good?
Yeah, that's such a good question, actually. So first of all, I fully agree with Fernanda's point on transformation as well. Like you mentioned, Gigi, I really think that, there's a big lift to be done. And on our side, we see innovation as a core driver for that transformation that needs to happen towards also, reaching a level of economic resilience that can last in the long run. I just want to reiterate that point. But to come back to your question, choosing our partners is really, like you mentioned, it can go into different directions, right? Like either you find a group that is looking at into the same direction, having a similar objective in mind, or you see foundational gap or needs in the industry that you have to fill, and you have to gather the right stakeholders to solve for that together. So I think those are two very different situations. From my perspective, it's mostly really important to find your ambassadors, your change drivers within organizations. And once you've found those, you have your champion from which you can start a partnership. Sometimes it takes a few iterations. Sometimes your first reach out will not deliver a fruitful partnership or will not deliver the desired outcome. But there is always people, we are living in a people's world, right? We have to do this together. So you always have to look for that human element of connection, shared goals and objectives. And through that, I think you can really build good, long-term, resilient partnerships. So in short, I think it's about people in the end of the day.
Thank you, Sophie. Yes, indeed. And also, a point that you made, you look for ambassadors and champions. So I like that it starts with that. And also you had mentioned, choosing a partner can go in different ways, which then means that there are learnings, which, gives me a pointer to the next question for Iska, because you did mention, right, because you work with different stakeholders, whether they are partners in terms of funders or implementation partners or, just knowledge partners. But what are your learnings from working in partnerships and collaborations?
Well, we have a lot of learnings, but let me pick at least two then. Within Enviu, whether it's the textile domain or other domains, I think one thing we learned definitely that it's important to establish a deep understanding of your potential collaborator. I think our most successful partnerships have often come from pilot projects, so a short-term commitment, aim to verify basically our ambitions and the visions if they are aligned. And once you tested that sort of in a short-term collaboration, then we moved into multi-year partnerships, and those projects were the most successful. So the learning there, we learned it the bad way as well, getting into long-term partnerships, basically, that after 1 year, we basically figured out that our ambitions were different. And then if you have already committed to a 3-year program, for instance, both partners and the funder are not aligned anymore. So that's a difficulty. So that's one major learning. The second one, I would say more on the execution part. So working together with implementing partners, definitely the pillar should be trust and transparency. And I think in that sense, working with our partners, we always try to be open, have honest sharing of the progress, also acknowledge that setbacks can happen that those are part of the journey, and that you can only solve them once you open up the conversation, even with the funders, maybe especially with the funders, because learnings are also part of the journey and should be communicated to prevent that other ones make the same mistakes, basically. So I think that trust and transparency is definitely a learning through the partnerships that we have.
Yeah, thanks, Iska, because also I know from an Enviu point of view, right, being part of a partnership requires looking at the big picture for the benefit of a common cause. I think one of our partners have said this, I'm borrowing this quote, but truly what you said, and also the learning being on the ground. And I thought, let's deep dive now, keeping in mind circularity in textiles, and which of course also is a touch point for all of us on the panel. So Sophie, I'd like to start with you. How does Fashion for Good view the way forward to build the infrastructure for circularity in textiles? And also, could you touch upon specifically how can we better connect waste collectors and waste aggregators to waste recyclers?
Yeah, totally. I think it's a very interesting and relevant question. It's definitely the main one that we are working on day to day. And I think also one that we can voice to the entire panel. It's how we work together as well. So the infrastructure is that we see is currently lacking in circularity. And that's where we see we need to do our contribution, each and all of us. So firstly, I think that is to work together with brands, with the industry, including suppliers across each and every stage, with governments and regulators, and with investors. So it's really about getting all the stakeholders together, like we mentioned earlier, in a pre-competitive space, and like Jiska mentioned, by creating trust and transparency amongst each other. But yeah, we need everyone to drive this infrastructure. So yeah, what is the path forward then to build it from here? So the question is always, where does it start, right? And that's, I think, that will be dependent on each region. Currently, we have been working together actually as panelists within Sorting for Circularity, one of our projects, where Enviu has been a part, or actually one of your ventures that you've built, Uptex, has been a part of the pilots that we've been driving there. Fernanda might not be directly involved, but H&M is actually one of the partners that is involved. And this is a perfect example of where we come together to actually pilot what is needed to get to that final objective. So yeah, so firstly, like I mentioned, I think stakeholder engagement is really important there. Secondly, I think we need to do this step by step. So what do I mean with that? Well, to mention an example, we started at Fashion for Good with a project that is called Full Circles Textile Recycling, and we wanted to go straight into what recycling technologies are ready for commercialization. And we found out that actually we were too ambitious. We were going too quickly. We wanted to solve this problem immediately, but actually there was still some barriers before we could actually get to this recycling stage. And those were related to feedstock, access to feedstock, which goes into the recycling process. So this was a big learning, going one step too quick. And this is also where the project that I just mentioned that we are all involved in, Sorting for Circularity, was born from. We just realized that we wanted to solve the issue straight away and we had to take a step back. So yeah, the second point is really identifying what steps need to be taken to get there and go step by step, as opposed to, let's say, the impatience or attitude of we need it tomorrow. That's just, it's not going to bring us there. So I think, yeah, those are two really important points. So getting everyone's involvement, and then secondly, tackling it step by step. Not sure if you want me to elaborate even more on that, but I'm also curious to hear what the rest of the group thinks. Actually, as I mentioned, I think we need to do this together.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. You know, Sorting for Circularity has been such a powerful initiative in India. And like you mentioned, with Enviu, and in fact, all of us being on board within that, and the change that we have seen, because even for Enviu being involved with textile waste within our Reweave program, it gave us that, it was a catalyst to actually, you know, bring people to the knowledge. I'm talking about brands, manufacturers, waste recyclers, waste aggregators. I think that was one powerful thing that Sorting for Circularity did, bring people to that same awareness. So their starting point has been so successful, which also then you mentioned, right? These are learnings that you come, like you started too fast, and then that gave birth to a fruitful perspective to the next step of actually enabling this very powerful program that you started. Hey, Iska, now this is very interesting because I was talking about Enviu, right? I know there's been some fabulous work in Bangladesh, and of course we just started there, and also it's a replication of our program in India. But while giving us an overview on that, you know, on what you do in Bangladesh, in keeping in mind textile circularity, I like how you brought the point of a long-term perspective in mind. So keeping that in mind, if you give us some insights on how Enviu selects its partners. I know I've asked you a number of questions in those two sentences, but you have a wealth of knowledge, so go ahead.
Yeah. So let me start with the last one, how we established, because that's how it began, establishing the partnership. The partnership that we have in Bangladesh is mainly between P4G as the funder, BA being another implementation partner, and Uptex is the sorting facility, indeed in India and Kenya, that's already built and that is now being established in Bangladesh. Plus Enviu, of course, so mainly 4 parties. And the establishment of the partnership went rather smooth because we already knew each other. So that's a very good basis to start with. We knew how it would be to be working together. And despite this familiarity, it took almost a year from our initial discussions towards the official start of our work. So even when you already know the partners, it can still take some time. But I truly believe that it helps during the implementation because you know everyone is aligned and you have the same goals and the same ambitions. So that helped. In our case, the shared ambition that we have is to establish a circular economy in the textile industry in Bangladesh, which we know is a very big goal and of course would never be the goal of one project, but that's more the North Star that we're aiming for. So that would entail promoting the circularity in Bangladesh, but at the same time encouraging the local use of textile waste instead of relying mainly on exports. So we believe that whenever the waste or the resources can stay in the country, it will help the circular economy in the country itself and promote the economy. But yeah, like Sophie also mentioned, when the ambition is really big, I think one of the things we do in our project is really celebrating every small step that we make, because in a system that's already established for over, well, I don't know how many years, many years, which is also partly informal, we know that it's difficult to make very big steps. So in the project, we focus on some early adapters that are willing to join the project. We try to demonstrate the feasibility of changes at small scale. And with this proof, basically, we try to convince more to join the circularity and to join the ecosystem that we're trying to establish. And at the same time, our partner BEA is focusing on the policy reformations where possible and to drive the policy change. Because I think in that sense, Enviu really builds bottom up. So we built a venture, we try to establish this circularity on a small scale. But at the same time, we also believe that the policy change can help accelerate this movement. So that's what I like about the partnership, that we have a partner that works completely different on the same topic.
Yeah.
I know that you also did it, of course, a similar project in India. Also wondering if you experienced the same process there of the baby steps, or if it could go faster maybe there.
Because that question was for me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I'd like to talk about how we worked very closely with Fashion for Good for, you know, at Uptex. You know, Uptex is a one-stop sorting hub where we look at bringing value to textile waste. And I know that in the Sorting for Circularity initiative, Fashion for Good worked very closely with Uptex. And one has been to bring in a new technology where, you know, you could almost accurately, I'd like to say 100%, because I've seen, you know, Matoha and how we looked at the composition of a particular fabric. And they enable the workers within the sorting center who are all women to actually use this handheld machine. And then you could precisely tell what is the composition. And then that would enable, you know, more opportunities to how you can recycle this efficiently, right? And along with that, we also, Fashion for Good also provided, you know, the opportunity to work with the in-store textile waste collection of H&M. Which now brings us to the point of also how H&M gets involved. And so in Chennai, we worked with some stores there, and we took in their in-store collection and we sorted it then to look at the most optimal ways of recycling it then. So what we're looking at is like, hey, you know, how can we make sure that, you know, waste is not waste anymore? You know, I know that the ambition is great even within that sentence. But yes, and I know that, you know, enabling this, making this happen, and actually being, you know, pioneers in creating this blueprint of a center, for that matter, even the techniques and the ways of doing it wouldn't have been possible if partnerships didn't exist. That's why I say that it's our secret sauce to our success. So, you know what, the audience has been very quiet. So if there are questions from the audience, but otherwise even among ourselves, because I think I've been that, you know, the one asking most questions, but I thought it would also be nice for us to ask each other questions meanwhile. But Sucharita and Cypria, if there are questions that we can also handle from the audience, if they are, we could do that.
Yeah, we do actually have a few great questions, and I'm just going to go in the order in which they've actually come up in the Q&A box.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, Sophie, this is a clarification that's addressed to you. You used the phrase pre-competitive space. Did you use that phrase? And if you did, could you explain this term, please?
Yes, of course. That's a good question, actually. Yeah, so what we try to avoid is to get into, let's say, this tricky situation where you bring together a couple of partners that are trying to reach the same goal, but that are kind of competing for, let's say, the same investments, the same funds available, the same market that is addressable here, because that makes it more difficult to share learnings along the way to get to the next level. So that's why we think that in sustainability, it's actually quite feasible to work together in a pre-competitive space. So that's kind of like taking it one step earlier. Before we actually get to, let's say, the market competition, we are in that phase of, okay, what do we actually need to drive and achieve? Like, for instance, with the Sorting for Circularity project that we have scaled to India together with Enviu and H&M. We first need to drive, or actually we need to understand what the textile waste landscape in India looks like. And that is something that we can do together before we actually get to, let's say, the execution stage. And that's where different players come into play to capture their market shares. So this work has to be done in, yeah, as mentioned, a pre-competitive space. So I hope that's a little bit more clear. I don't have the exact definition now to hand, but that's my interpretation of it. And yeah, I think that's that is basically the only way, as mentioned earlier, to get everyone together and to bridge the gaps that are in existence currently.
Thanks, Sophie. Gigi, we can take one more at least. Is that okay?
Yes, go ahead.
So the next question is around recycling and upcycling infrastructure. And the question is, how much has that changed since the increased momentum around circularity across the region, and where are there still gaps?
Fernando, you want to take that?
I can take that. Thank you very much. I think I agree with the question that there is a momentum now for building more infrastructure around both sorting and recycling and upcycling, downcycling, and what all the opportunities we have to do with used textiles. I'm saying used textiles because we have, this tendency of saying textile waste. But if we think about it, as it becomes feedstock, it's no longer waste, right? I think, Gigi, you said something so interesting. Waste is not waste anymore. I don't know if it was, I forgot now, Iska or Gigi. Yeah. But yeah, right? You said waste, not waste anymore. But if you think about it, as we are talking about circularity, the idea is that the textile waste is not waste, it's used textiles, right? So I'm going to keep using that terminology. I hope you don't mind. So I think I think there's we can see very clearly that major stakeholders in the textile industry, both the big ones and the small ones, have started collaborating, mapping, trying to understand the flows of used textiles, and trying to come up with the solutions that they can address easily. I would say I'm not talking about yet about the stakeholders here, right? But there are, let's say, some low-hanging fruits that most stakeholders are going for, and I think that all of us here in this room are actually going for the not low-hanging fruits. We're also going for the high-hanging fruits, right? So we are really trying to collaborate and create the opportunities for improving that infrastructure in a big scale, right? But addressing the gaps that you mentioned there, I'm so glad I got this question now because I think that it's important for us to think of addressing these gaps in building that infrastructure, not only from the industry perspective, so which means not only from the top down, but also from the bottom up. And the gaps that exist over there right now is at least one that we are trying to address at the H&M Foundation, which is to build equity and shift power relations while coming up with these solutions, while building that infrastructure for textile recycling, which means making sure that we involve those who are already working with this in this industry instead of just coming up with new solutions from top down. I'm going to give an example here, and Sophie, you already touched on it, which is people who make a living out of picking and selling waste, right? So collectively called waste pickers. There are several kinds, but several kinds of occupations, several kinds of materials, but let's call them collectively waste pickers. Waste pickers, they already work with sorting through used material, and they already have material there that can be used for the textile industry, such as used textiles, right? So it just makes business sense for players who are already in the industry to collaborate with these people who are normally informal workers to build this bridge on what's needed for the industry, but also what's needed to have safe and dignified lives for informal workers. So if I could choose one gap that we need to address right away, it is, let's make this transformation together while making it more equitable, both for the formal workers who are there right now, but also the informal workers.
Sorry, I love that, Fernanda, and I can even add a little bit to it from our perspective. I think I think you touched upon such important points, and just one additional one that I wanted to mention is that yeah, the way actually that currently the European Union is specifying how to look at textile waste is by means of a hierarchy, right? And at the top of the hierarchy, for sure, we have reusing the textile waste, because in an ideal world, we don't use any additional resources. We just give it a second life, either through, yeah, consumer to consumer marketplaces, or I don't know, if you donate it to your sister who might have just had a child of the same age of your child. These types of reusing are by far the most efficient for everyone. Then after reuse, yeah, there's a lot of steps in between, but basically after reuse, we try to see if there is, for instance, a repair that we can do to still go into the reuse level. If that is not an option, then we actually have to look at the alternatives, right? And that's where we can still see if, yeah, well, there is still a whole channel of re-commerce, resale, etc. But if that is still not an option, then we go to the next level, which is recycling. And for recycling, there is also different levels. So there is higher quality recycling, so to say, lower quality recycling, and that can go into different streams then afterwards. That's also what we try to map out in this sorting for circularity framework, like what is the actual percentage of textile waste that ends up in each part of the hierarchy. So fully, like completely transparent. Actually, we try to share this open source. So I recommend you to look at the report. You can find it on the website. But yeah, so with the higher quality recycling, we hope to do this textile to textile. But if that is not an option, then we look into different alternatives. And that's where actually Enviu has an amazing initiative, which is the Good Felts initiative, where, let's say, lower quality post-consumer waste is actually transformed into felts that can then be used for different purposes, either for buildings, for yeah, many use cases. Actually, you can probably address it yourself even way better than I can. But yeah, that's the next step in the hierarchy. And then finally, all the way at the bottom, with still a few steps in between, we of course least desired step. We hope it doesn't end up in landfill or incineration. So yeah, just wanted to touch on that hierarchy and how we try to bring that also to different regions at this moment.
Thank you, Sophie.
Gigi?
Yeah.
Sorry, there are a slew of questions. No, there's a bunch of them. But while we're on this, because we've, I think, addressed the reuse and recycle pieces of what one calls circularity, right? Broadly speaking, the 3 R's. There's a reduce question here, and it's actually addressed to Fernanda. So I think it might be appropriate to take that now. Would that be okay? Yep, okay. So Fernanda, the question is that the focus on waste and recycling is great, but it also highlights the fact that there is way too much clothing being made, and the burden for this has to be on our natural world and people. Therefore, is this a big tension for you? The business model of H&M is based on growth and selling more clothing.
Thank you very much for the question. And I think it's very important to address the elephant in the room, which is overproduction and overconsumption. So I will answer with the perspective from the H&M Foundation, because the H&M Foundation, we are a family philanthropy separate from the H&M group. So our funds come from the family who are the main owners of and funders of the H&M group, but we are actually operating separately. We work for the whole industry. So does Fashion for Good, right? So and Enview, we are all here working for everyone. So from our perspective, of course, overconsumption and overproduction definitely need to be addressed. I completely agree with you on the super need to emphasize the R of reduce, right? And to be very honest with you, I think that most brands, a lot of brands, let's say the brands who are leading sustainability actions in this industry, they are working on alternate business models that are looking into first reuse, resell, repair, recycle. So mostly the steps that you have just mentioned, Sophie. I completely agree with you on this hierarchy of how to deal with used textiles. And I think that the industry is very slow in what they are doing, but they are actually trying very hard to work on alternate business models. And to be honest, I think this is why we are here today and in our everyday work, is to try to understand what kind of business models are working, what is missing in those steps that these major stakeholders are doing, and how can we, both as a family philanthropy here, but as conveners, as in the case of the other panelists, as also as implementers of activities, what is it that we can do to support these big stakeholders as well to move from this current business model to a circular business model? So I think that this kind of conversation we're having here today is exactly what we need to keep doing again next year, tomorrow, next week, so we can learn from each other and share more of the solutions we have found.
Yeah.
Right?
May I also respond to you? Because I think that's a very good question, by the way, indeed, in everyone's mind always when talking about this. That's where it comes so logical that policy, brands, and production all should be on the same ambition to get there. But I think one major part is being forgotten sometimes here, which is the consumer, because eventually the consumer decides where to buy. If you want to buy with H&M or another brand who's 100% who sells 100% recycled materials. I know H&M also has the ambition to working with, I think, 50% recycled materials within a few years. So even the consumer has I would say they have the biggest voice here to transform the industry by the decisions that they make. And what comes to my mind is the BlackBerry company. I guess you all know the mobiles that are now not so known anymore. They had the biggest market share, and they just refused as a brand to move along with the touchscreen, and that's how they lost the market. And that's also how I look at brands. I think there is a major transformation happening, and I think the brands that do not join the movement in circularity eventually will lose their market share. So yeah, that's at least what I'm hoping for and what I truly believe. So they will join.
Thanks, Iska, and this has been a very nice conversation. So, Suchi, I'm just wondering if there's any part more that you would like to ask, or should we take we take another 10 minutes and then come back to the questions?
Yes, let's do that. People are keeping the questions coming as we have them answered. So let's do 10 minutes and come back to Q&A again. And I think we'll start the next round of questions with the one from the entrepreneurs in the room. So Marina, Shamira, and Miraj noted your questions. We will come back to you in 10 minutes. Over to you, Gigi.
Okay, sounds good. You know, Fernanda, I wanted to circle back with this question to you, but then we were having such an interesting conversation, but I'm going to ask this because this is important, at least for the part where H&M Foundation is working closely with Enviu on when it comes to circularity on textiles, right? Of course, they work with other partners too. So I just want to know, what has been the foundation's experience in supporting multi-stakeholder programs, and what role do you usually play?
Oh, this is awesome. Because we want, to enable and get more people to collaborate with multi-stakeholder, multi-sector partnerships, right? So let me tell you about this. I love it. So at the H&M Foundation, we've been around for over 10 years, and we understood that initially the way we were doing, let's say, philanthropy was created very limited impact with like bilateral agreements with partners for specific areas such as education or water. It was very siloed. It was benefiting only a small group of people who we back then called beneficiaries or target group. We don't even use that terminology anymore. But we understood that to actually create systems change and help support the textile industry in this transition that it has to go through, we would have to work very differently. So we researched a lot, and we found this beautiful, beautiful method for collaboration that is called collective impact. Collective impact is a well-structured way of collaborating that is, for example, different from a regular consortium or just collaborations, because it means that all partners build together a common agenda, and they align and build on top of each other's activities towards the same primary actors. We call primary actors the people who have lived experience of a social problem, who then are equipped and have the resources and opportunities to lead their own lives and come up with solutions for their own problems. So primary actors, right? So the role we play at the H&M Foundation is to enable, to create the platform through collective impact for these collaborations to happen. And Enviu is one of our partners, and the partners by themselves create equip the primary actors. And I'm going to give you an example now to make this a bit more understandable. So in Bengaluru, there is a lot of families who live picking waste and selling waste as a living, right? And that's their occupation. And they are definitely marginalized, and they suffer a lot of, they go through a lot of invisible barriers in their daily lives. So what we did is we got 10 different partners to collaborate through collective impact initiatives, which means that all partners, they have regular communication with each other. So they align on their activities, and Enviu being one of them, of course, to together create the better conditions for the waste pickers to lift themselves out of poverty. So it's very holistic, to be honest. And here comes the part of partnering up with like-minded partners and non-like-minded partners. Mm-hmm. So this partnership covers, for example, water and sanitation in the homes in the communities where the waste pickers lives. It includes education for their children, and includes, for example, skills training for other occupations in case they want to go to other occupations. But it also includes skills trainings for sorting textiles. And then comes a bit more closer to the textile industry, not only sorting textiles, but also skills for learning how to do that, but also different business models for working with textile recycling, working with empowering the waste pickers to run the textile sorting centers, and so on and so forth. And this is the part that we are super proud to have Enviu with us, testing these new business models for recycling textiles in Bengaluru, with partnership with hotels and other hospitality industry players. So this is such a beautiful partnership, and it brings me back to what I had mentioned before, which is the fact that the industry needs recycled material to go away from virgin materials, right? And waste pickers have this material that can be recycled. So one beautiful, beautiful partnership that emerged out of this collective force, it was the buttons. Let me tell you what it is. The waste pickers in Mangaluru, they collect plastic, and this plastic used to be sold to whoever wanted to buy. But now we have, a partnership has been catalyzed through this initiative, which is this social innovation, the social entrepreneurship organization called Hasirudala Innovations. They used to be small when they started. They now buy this plastic from the waste pickers, PET plastic, and transform them into little flakes. The flakes are then sold to manufacturers of buttons. And then this manufacturer of buttons now sort or supply buttons to major players in the textile industry. The H&M is one of the buyers of these buttons. So all of the clothes manufactured for the H&M group in India, and they go worldwide, right? That have buttons, come from these buttons that have the recycled plastic that the waste pickers collected. So it's a beautiful, we call it inclusive circularity. It's not only circularity, it's inclusive. And we find it very beautiful because it's not only helping the industry to fulfill its needs in terms of recycled material, but it's also helping to bring more other sources of income for the waste pickers, dignified jobs for the waste pickers, and it has the whole traceability element to it. So it's exactly this kind of intentional collaborations that the H&M Foundation creates, and that we want, that we talk about it very proudly so that others can create similar intentional collaborations.
Yes. And Fernanda, there's such a science to partnerships and collaborations, because we work, like you said, in collective impact. We work closely with the H&M Foundation. And I know it's measurable, it's accessible, it's feasible. It's not just partnerships in the past where you would just talk about it's a handshake. No, not at all. We're walking in each other's shoes. We are leaning on each other's expertise. Iska, this is something I would want you to answer, right? In Enview, we believe, we need partners to make our work bigger and better. But very often in the larger ecosystems, we've also seen partners work in parallel. So what's your view and remedy on this to fuel more collaboration and scale of impact, and of course, trust?
Yeah, that's a very good one. We've seen it in multiple countries, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. Starting with the intentionally part, which would mean that two projects are running in parallel to each other, maybe even having the same objective. And then it comes to the trust and transparency part, knowing each other, talking to each other, and finding the collaboration. This is what we have done in Bangladesh as well. I know in Bangladesh, the Unino Switch is a major program on textiles. At the same time, our program started with P4G and BEA that I explained before. So when we got to know about each other's work, we shared our work packages, we looked for overlap, and we literally are working together on some of the deliverables now. So that's, for me, the ideal situation. At the same time, when I said unintentionally, I think one of the things we're trying to do now is to look for gaps in the system in East Africa and see if we can start a program there to build further on the UpTex facility that we already have. And what we're facing, like you said, to fuel further collaboration and wider scale, is that it's very difficult to actually know which programs are running. So you really have to know it from connections. There's no database or something in which you can see which programs are currently running, which are going to start in the next year. So actually to define, to write a good proposal and to have a good project plan would ideally build upon the projects that are already happening, or maybe even flow into the projects that are already running. And that's something which I'm still amazed about how that can be possible, actually.
Yeah. You know what? I really like Sucharita to take this question, if you can, because Iska was mentioned, all this is happening. And with ANDE being this platform which also drives collaboration, we've seen it and we've experienced it. I'm sure all of us, within the room too has. So Suchi, I just want to, talk very quickly from an ANDE point of view, because this is a gap. This is a challenge, right? So yeah, would love to hear from you.
No, thanks. Thanks, Gigi. This is a bit of a surprise, but thank you for giving me the opportunity. No, it is. It's come up, and as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, oh, there are a lot of learnings in this for us as ANDE, given what I've heard you say. But I think that really is the reality, the way Iska just articulated that, right? I mean, we've asked ourselves very often, right? How can we make this data more available? What projects are happening? We've had conversations with other members like the ANDE Foundation around, is it possible to do some kind of mapping? But the point is that map changes so quickly, right? How do you keep up with the pace of change? So I don't have any big things, but I will repeat what I said yesterday, right, around partnerships, is that these things take time, and I know there's this tremendous urgency around needing to make progress, especially when it comes to something like circularity, because of the perceived impact it can have on issues pertaining to climate and the environment. But unfortunately, that's not how systems work. Fernanda, I know we've had a conversation about this. You can't fast track certain things, and I think this is one of those pieces beyond a point, right? So I hope we can, like Fernanda said, not just have these conversations more regularly, but actually find ways to tie it in. And our experience has been there are some things you can templatize and some things that you just can't. And that's something that we'll have to live with, and which is probably why, keeps folks like us and networks like us in business.
Thank you, Sucharita, and thank you for being such a sport for this very surprising question. But I want to address, something very important, and which is also, I'm sure the audience would like to hear. So, Sophie, I want to talk from a financing and a legislation point of view. So when we talk about investors in the industry, how can we better educate them, but also outside the industry to finance the innovation and the infrastructure gaps when we talk about, especially circularity in textiles? And also very closely, which is also important to address, is the legislation. What legislation is required in the region to accelerate textile to textile recycling?
Yeah, great questions. Let me start by addressing legislation, actually, because this is something I think quite close to our heart. We have recently joined as Fashion for Good as a advisory board member of Policy Hub to really support, let's say, the voice of the innovator to legislators. And when we were running the project in India with yourselves, sort of circularity, we definitely ran into, let's say, the struggle or challenge, let's call it a challenge, where the industry was rather informal still. So I think Fernanda also already touched upon this, but a lot of it happens, let's say, still in the streets. Where, let's say, in countries like France and the Netherlands, there is certain regulations that have cost for an infrastructure to be built around, for instance, textile bins in the streets that are then tendered to sorters to obtain this textile waste as feedstock. That is still not really in existence in India, we found. So that's where I think legislation really plays a very important role. What I know and what I've learned so far is that in India, for instance, there is a decentralized and a central government. So really at the central side, having a regulation that, for instance, covers extended producer responsibility, that would be absolutely key from my point of view. And then on the other hand, the eco design, like really focusing on designing for circularity, using less different materials, using substrates or connectors that are recyclable, that do not block, let's say, the machines, using less disruptors. Those types of tips and tricks would also really accelerate circularity. So yeah, EPR, or extended producer responsibility, and eco design, that's what's currently in development in Europe. I would love to see that in South Asia, and I would love to see that being implemented by the central government and then actually executed by the decentralized state governments. That would really accelerate it. So yeah, on the legislation side, I think that would be really required for textile to textile circularity, at least. Then on the financing side, I actually I want to reiterate Jiska's point, which I thought was really strong, in that it's often the case that indeed it's difficult to know where to start and how to build on work that's already done, because there's not really a map in existence. So that's also where organizations, I think, like ourselves all come into play, and we try to create these types of landscapes, maps of intelligence, and try to share those as much as possible externally. When it comes to financing, I see it really as there is a world of investors in the textiles industry, and there's a world of investors outside of the textiles industry. And increasingly, fortunately, there is a large interest in ESG investing, sustainability investing. So from my point of view, to map out both is a crucial step. We have an investments manager in our team that's doing a really great job at the moment to have a clear overview of what the landscape looks like. And we've also recently published a report with Spring Lane Capital that I can recommend to have a look at. But yeah, so like I mentioned, there's these two sides. There's the textiles investors and there's the external different industry investors. And I think this second part is really where we can accelerate financing by explaining the rather complex textiles industry in language that we can all understand, highlighting the economic benefits that are still to be achieved, also highlighting the challenges that are still gonna take a couple of years, because research and development is not something that happens overnight. It's gonna happen over a couple of years, and then kind of sharing that green premium amongst ourselves. That is really really key from my point of view.
Thank you, Sophie. Also, I'd like to reiterate, right? You had mentioned, how do we get investors from within the industry and out to be interested? And you had, for Enviu, what we do is we build scalable, profitable, sustainable ventures. You spoke about the good felt. We have our linen pilot. And both of these look at addressing and creating impact at scale, but at the same time, we're building a scalable business. So we need these kind of information points, data points, to actually get investors within the industry or out to take note of, to know that there are, places of what would be a good ROI for them too. Because that's the kind of data that we miss. Because my conversations with a few investors is, where's the data to show that we've been successful, or, where's the ROI on this? Now, there's enough data, but who's putting it together? And that's where I think even Fashion for Good has come up with some very good data points, very good resources. So like you mentioned, there are resources available. So it would be nice to share it with each other, or I'm sure we can find it on your website. So what I thought, because I'm also excited about wanting to answer questions, what I thought is, if each of us in the panel can quickly address this one point, talking about one area that you would like to see increased levels of collaboration. What would you like to see more of? If I can go around the table here, and then I'm going to give the floor to Sucharita to, to bring on the questions. Iska, would you like to start? You're on mute.
One area for increased collaboration, that's a tough question, actually, because there are many. I I think that what we touched upon previously, the connecting the policy changes that are ambitions to the execution is, I think, is a point where we can improve. I think policies are being made without exactly knowing how to implement them or the impact that it has on multiple stakeholders. Just as an example, imagine that we will be exporting less from Europe to Africa, which is a major hub for used clothes. Actually, those people live from it, so it's their source of income. So if we just stop exporting our clothes or do it less, it will have an impact socially on the people. So that's the point of collaboration where I think we can improve, that to level between the policy and the actual impact on the ground.
Thank you, Iska. Fernanda, would you like to go next?
Yes, I think that one area where we need to see more collaboration is in integrating the voices of different people in the textile industry. So working, definitely, I agree with you, Yiska, there's a lot of partnership needed for improving policies and understanding how the policies, the consequences of these policies that are created, but also coming from the other extreme, which is including the perspectives of the last ones who are affected by it, whether it's the people who work with the used textiles in African countries, for instance, but actually the ones on the very end of that journey, of that flow, the people who live around the landfills, not only the ones who work with the used textiles, but after that, the ones who live around the landfills, what happens in their lives. We know, for example, that there's a lot of people who burn textiles for generating energy, for heating water, for instance. Their voices need to be heard as well, their perspectives, the informal workers who also live very right next to the value, they are within the value chain of the textile industry, their voices need to be heard. Whatever solutions we are being brought up to the table now, the innovations, the entrepreneurial ideas that are popping up right now, everything needs to account with the perspectives of all stakeholders involved. So we needed to, from now on, what needs to be done to enable this transformation is to always take this holistic approach, always consider the impact on people and the planet in all the solutions that are created.
Thank you, Fernanda.
I hope it makes sense.
To me, yes.
From my point of view, because I think a lot has already been touched on, legislation, financing, infrastructure. So I think, to really get to true circularity, or to get in line with that 1.5 degree pathway till 2015, I think there's still an innovation gap that is going to cover at least 40 to 50% of that, let's say, CO2 reduction. So from my point of view, if we talk about circularity, the innovation gap from my point of view is in blends recycling, actually. So we are doing a lot of work in accelerating cellulosics recycling and also synthetics recycling, but blends recycling is still a very important area. Pre-processing is a very important area, because to even get to recycling, we need a couple of steps in pre-processing, such as decolorization, disruptor removal, finish removal. Those types of steps are super important. And again, one of those areas where I would say, to come back to Yiska's point, we need a bit of a landscape and overview of how it can be done, because it's often now solved in-house, which is not always most efficient. And then actually, if we talk about South Asia specifically, a lot of the recycling infrastructure is currently mechanical, or almost all of it. And mechanical, while it's great, it is finite. it will probably last 1 or 2 cycles, and after that the fibers will become too short and the quality will deteriorate. And that's where we require to accelerate chemical recycling, because that's where chemical recycling comes into play after 1 or 2 times of mechanical recycling. So that is still, hopefully, I know a lot of our innovators actually are planning to expand to Asia, but that's something that I would like to see happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I just have one thing to say, because I think this can be a game changer. I'm talking about catalytic funds from corporate foundations, because that can exhibit greater flexibility and agility to innovate and taking risks. So that's where I would like to see more collaboration on. Suchi, do we want to have time for that one question from an entrepreneur?
No, actually, there are a bunch of questions. So I'm going to, just because it lines up with the responses. So on the EPR question, Sophie, we're actually at time, so I'm going to try and do this a little quickly. Specifically, you've answered that partially, but the question is, how do you foresee momentum in South Asia, particularly in India? So maybe if you have any thoughts on that.
Momentum in EPR. Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I think that there is a bit of momentum at this moment, also given that, let's say 45 million people work in textiles in India. So it's a very big percentage. I think 8.5% of the total textile waste is coming from India. So I think that should really drive the momentum and the urgency right now. But other than that, I think it's actually a question to think about for myself as well, and I can come back to if anyone wants to address me personally on LinkedIn, feel free, and I'll come back to it.
Thanks, Sophie. I think the other question I would go to is a consumer question, right? And the question is, would truly circular fashion be possible only when consumers demand it? If yes, how do we get them to demand it?
Yeah, I think I talked about it before, so I will try to answer, and please add where possible. If I compare it to, for instance, smoking, at least in the countries I've been living, the government definitely is able with their policies to get people to smoke less by prohibiting it, by increasing the taxes, etc. So it makes it less attractive for consumers. So I don't think it's consumer demand only, but I do think that consumers can be steered towards a certain direction. And the other thing is, if imagine all brands decide at the same time that they will only be selling clothes that are fully recyclable, then there's only one option for the consumer to buy these. Those probably will be a bit more expensive though. So I don't think consumers have the only voice. I do think it's a system that's needed, but I do think they do have a big choice now in which multiple things are offered.
Thanks, Iska. And Machi, thank you. And that might be the last question because we are 2 minutes over. Thank you for staying till the end. So here's the question. What are some new, are you planning to scale your joint and or individual initiatives to new countries?
Who is that question for? Is it for all of us?
For all
Absolutely, for all of you, because each of you are doing different things in different countries. And that's why I said that would be the last question.
Thank you. Great question. And I think perhaps it's one of the easiest answers in the sense that I think everyone here is part of enabling this transformation towards circularity, I think it's very good that, of course, we want to scale our initiatives. We want to copy successful initiatives. We want others to copy our successful initiatives. And most of all, we want to collaborate to make these successful initiatives happen elsewhere as well. So my definite answer for this is yes. Of course, there's a lot of details to be discussed on what is to be scaled where, but of course, we want to make sure that our learnings, solutions, and everything we have done along the way, both the failures and the successes, are spread out so that others connect together with us and help to enable this transformation.
Yeah. For Enviu, it's part of our DNA, right? If you look at our circularity for textile program, we are present in India, Bangladesh, and in East Africa. So the answer is yes, and it is the part of what we do.
For Fashion for Good as well, we're always on the lookout for gaps and opportunities for projects and pilots. So we will always scale that to Asia as well, where relevant. And we have a whole team sitting in Asia, which is fantastic. Something concretely that we are doing right now is actually our strategic supplier initiative, which is a program to support brand strategic suppliers to implement market-ready technologies. And that is something where actually 90% of the supply chain is currently sitting in Asia. So we're doing a lot of work on that concretely in the region and expanding it to multiple countries. And I think, it's something to watch out, and hopefully will really accelerate the transition.
Great, thank you very much. We're kind of 5 minutes over, so I will just formally thank this wonderful panel and the participants for making the time today. Please do join us on our sessions tomorrow. You have the links, and there's also a link to feedback. We'd love to hear from you so we can do what we're doing better. The way we've designed sessions this year has been informed by what we heard from participants last year. So with those few words, thank you so much from all of us, and look forward to continuing to work with you going forward.
Thank you, Sucharita and Andy, for having us, and thank you so much to the panel too.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye all.